right, my clock says we are at 00 hours. Looks like there are still people dropping in, but we are a go to start this webinar. So welcome to this FIA, Finnish Institute of International Affairs, and CUSP, Center on U.S. Power and Politics, Transatlantic Currents event. Today, we're going to talk about transatlantic security defense challenges. I'm Charlie Slonius-Pasternak. I'm a few months back head of CUSP here at FIA, but being acutely aware that none of you signed up to listen to me, I'm just going to ask you to please keep your cameras off, enter any of the questions into the chat. I will later on pick them up from there. And with that, I will hand you off to the chair for today's Transatlantic Currents events, our own non-resident fellow, Leo Michel. Take it away, Leo.
Thank you very much, Charlie, and good morning. It's morning for me here in Washington, D.C. We're delighted this morning for this episode of Transatlantic Currents to have a conversation with Philip Breedlove. Philip Breedlove is currently Distinguished Professor at the Sam Nunn School of International Affairs at Georgia Tech University. He's the member of boards overseeing the Nonpartisan Atlantic Council and the Center for New American Security. He has had a remarkable 39-year career in the United States Air Force, including multiple assignments throughout his career in Europe, followed by a number of high-level assignments in the Pentagon. But most notably, from May 2013 to May 2016, he served concurrently as NATO's Supreme Allied Commander for Operations, better known as SACEUR, and as Commander of the U.S. European Command. Before we get into the kind of the heart of some of the policy and other issues, I would like to ask General Breedlove to explain this arrangement. Now, the practice of having the NATO SACEUR also command U.S. military forces in Europe really dates back to General Eisenhower in the early 1950s. So the SACEUR and EUCOM, they have two separate bosses. They have two separate staffs. On the NATO side, General Breedlove reported directly to the North Atlantic Council. On the U.S. side, he reported directly to the President and the Secretary of Defense. So General Breedlove, welcome to the FIA webinar. And let's begin. How does this dual-hatted arrangement work in practice? It's really quite unique.
Well, first of all, good morning, Charlie, and thank you, Leo, for the introduction, and thank you both for having me with you today. Yes, it's an interesting arrangement and a very delicate dance, if you would allow me to do that. One of the first things I was told by multiple SACEURs is that as a SACEUR, if you're seen to be a U.S. general, you will fail. The nations of NATO need to look up and see a leader that is about NATO and not about the U.S. However, they all accept and understand that part of the problem, I think, that this is fused together because the U.S. European Command commander owns and can utilize all those U.S. forces, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and our new Guardians that are assigned in Europe are assigned to the U.S. commander, and he makes them available to NATO. And there have been times where, as the SACEUR, I had to take a resident European force and immediately put it into a tasking in order to meet our obligations bilaterally and multilaterally inside of NATO. So this arrangement of an American general owning American forces, but then being the SACEUR, is I think a very good arrangement to make sure that U.S. forces are immediately available to NATO when they're needed.
Well, it brings us now to what you really dealt with in that position. You played a central role in dealing with the 2014 Russian annexation of Crimea and its military intervention in eastern Ukraine. So I'm going to ask you to just take some time, and could you reflect on what you consider to be the most important lessons learned from NATO and its partners across the spectrum. From the intelligence and warning phase, there was then the phase where you have to take political and military decision-making, to the early NATO and US responses, which proceeded along somewhat different timelines, and to the progressive steps since 2014 to improve NATO's forward posture and readiness.
So thank you. It's a pretty broad question. And I'll kind of start at some strategic thoughts, and then I'll end up at some tactical thoughts. And one of those will illustrate what we just talked about, the need for the merger of the US EUCOM Commander and SACEUR. I think to start at a very strategic level, the first lesson learned that we learned, or maybe we didn't learn, we relearned or we reobserved, is that history is not over. You know, NATO has done a good job for almost 75 years at keeping the relative peace in Europe. No world wars, but some skirmishes along the way. And we were in a period after the fall of the wall where everyone was, and I like to call it, hugging the bear, trying to bring Russia into a more Western orientation and trying to make them a part of the Western family of nations, etc. And then we saw in 2008 what some said is just an aberration, a small blip on the screen. We shouldn't be too worried about it, as Russia invaded Georgia and now occupies about 20% of Georgia. And some rose the alarm. Others said, okay, you know, this doesn't break what we're trying to do. Let's go back to re-embracing Russia and trying to bring them into the West. And this is when I became the SACEUR in the summer then of 2013, and we were worried about changing the mission in Afghanistan from ISAF to Resolute Support. We were worried about what is the raison d'etre of NATO, what were we going to be doing as Afghanistan drawed down and our big out of country deployment was drawing down. And then, of course, in the spring of 2014, we saw the invasion and annexation of Crimea, followed shortly thereafter by the invasion, occupation, and now the mission of working with local forces to hold ground in the Donbass, the southeast part of Ukraine. So the bottom line is history is not over. We have seen our big neighbor to the east 3 times from 2008 through 2014 use its military to change internationally recognized borders in the Eurasian landmass. And so I think the first lesson learned is that we cannot rest. We have to remain ready. Great thinkers have said before that the best way to avoid war is to be ready for war. And we had let our guard down. All of us, including my nation, had taken big peace dividends and cut deeply into our militaries and even more deeply into our military readiness. We had fought over 20 years of COIN, counterinsurgency, meaning the small unit fights in Afghanistan and enabling highly specialized units to do very specific missions. We had lost our skills and our readiness to do large force employment, to do Article 5 style of fighting. And so the second big lesson learned is that we can never step away from the ability to do our Article 5 commitment. Again, we saw a nation, a large nation, use its military force to change internationally recognized borders 3 times in this period. And so we have to be ready for that. And so we had to step back from this counterinsurgency position that we were in as we were fighting as an alliance plus, a coalition in Afghanistan. And we needed to examine what we were going to need to, once again, be able to do large force employment in Article 5. And the very first thing that leaped out at us is that our readiness was not what it needed to be. We had created readiness in our various forces that was able to feed the fight in Afghanistan. Get a unit ready, send it to Afghanistan, bring it home. Get another unit ready, send it to Afghanistan and bring it home. We were not ready to fight large formations inside of our militaries, neither to deploy them or fight with them. And so we had to look at our readiness, and a couple of things just leaped off the page. And these are my observations now. Others who are smarter might describe them differently. But to me, readiness is about training and exercising, and it's about kit, the combination of the two. We have to have our people ready via training, via exercises, education, all the things that get them ready to do their mission. And then we have to examine the readiness of our kit. Do we have the right kind of tanks, ships, aircraft? Are they interoperable with our alliance partners? Are they now, some of the words being used in NATO as interchangeable, which I think is interoperable on steroids? Do we have the kind of kit that makes it us able to fight at the readiness that we need to if required? And when we examined our kit, we found that we weren't ready. We had taken the same, I call it in America, procurement holiday, and we had not been doing the appropriate upgrades of existing kit, nor investing in new kit, taking either a short-term view or a long-term view of our ability. So we began looking at how to get our training and exercising to a new level, emphasizing large force employment, emphasizing Article 5, and we began to look at our kit in naval, land, and air to see if we were where we needed to be and if our kit could respond the way we wanted to. The third big lessons learned, and this one may be new to some in the audience, but I'm reading a really wonderful book now that's not out yet, but I'm reviewing a book called Putin's Playbook. And it talks deeply about this, something that I've been talking about for a while. So you got to know that I love this book because it picks up a theme I've been carrying, and that is that we are in a phase now, another lessons learned, we're in a phase where many of our nations and many of our militaries like to use the word competition, that we are competing. I say that our opponent is fighting. And in Rebecca's book, she says it very, very clearly. She says, we are at war. And I think that we are at war, a war below the lines of kinetic means, but a war in that hybrid zone, that gray zone, whatever you want to call it. And so what I have been saying for some time, I think, is our third lesson learned, the big one. And that is that if you, meaning us, are competing and your opponent is fighting, then we, us, are losing because we are not in the same mindset as those who oppose us. What we do know is that our big neighbor to the east will use, as I've said twice now, this will be the third time, they will use their military force to change internationally recognized borders. So in non-NATO states, they have demonstrated that they will use force to do that. What they have demonstrated clearly is that in NATO states, they will take a little different tact and they will employ primarily these gray zone tactics, these, as Mr. Gerasimov calls, asymmetric methods, indirect means to attack in using all the elements of governmental power. And so if we are competing with them and they are fighting us, we are losing. So I think that we need to rethink the way we look at this lesson reobserved on readiness. We need to rethink the way we look at this lesson learned about competing and fighting in the gray zone. And those are the basis for us to move forward in thinking.
So let me ask you, just to dig into your last response a little bit in three different areas. I'm sorry, it's a little bit unfair to put three questions together in one, but just a couple of more specifics. once again, you were SACEUR. You had certain authorities, but in some ways, they perhaps were too limited. Even before you get to kinetic warfare, things tend to move very quickly these days. And yet, for good reason, NATO, the decision to actually take a military action rests with the civilian authorities, not with you as a military person. But do you believe at the time that your SACEUR authorities were broad enough, or that today's SACEUR authorities are broad enough to have a quick response to either, for example, increase the level of deterrence, because that's what we'd like to do. We don't want to go right to a conflict, or if necessary to deploy forces. And I'm going to keep it to two questions: the SACEUR authorities, and linked to that, there's been this new emphasis, which I think has been very helpful, on military mobility in Europe. And military mobility not only for the purpose of US forces, obviously, but for European forces. It's an area where NATO, thankfully, I think, in my view, has been doing more work with the EU, but the EU has big responsibilities and capabilities here as well. So on those two areas, SACEUR authorities and increased military mobility in Europe, how do you see these two issues?
So the answer to your first two questions is no and no, and I was quite vocal about that at the time. The SACEUR in the days past Eisenhower, when we got into the Cold War, and when we were staring at the Warsaw Pact coming through the Fulda Gap, we gave the SACEUR a lot more authorities to rapidly deploy and employ in certain cases. Now, the beauty, and I respect it, of NATO is that we have civilian control of the military. So I don't think we'll ever get back to where SACEUR was during those times. But I think there is a better middle ground that allows the SACEUR to more rapidly get ready the forces, and sometimes preemptively get ready the forces when the indications and warnings tell us that we're facing something that we need. And so we started making a movement to that. All the way back to the Wales Conference, the SACEUR was given some new authorities to get ready the NRF and the new elements of the NRF that we were putting together in the Wales Conference, and then we further defined in the Warsaw Conference. So over the two SACEURs now, since I've been there, we see a very incremental, not large, but an incremental movement back to allow the SACEUR the authorities that they need. And I don't think we've gone far enough. Oh, by the way, this is one of the beautiful things about the SACEUR also being the US European Command Commander. In my time, NATO did not make a rapid decision about putting new aircraft in CAPS or air policing in the Baltic nations. Once Russia invaded the Donbass and started handing off to proxy forces, of course, the Baltics are thinking we're next, and they wanted NATO CAP. And NATO was taking a little time to determine whether they would do that CAP or not. And so I, as the US European Command Commander, put US aircraft over those nations in a bilateral answering of our commitment to the three nations. And then other nations came alongside of us and started joining, and then eventually NATO decided to increase the air policing as a NATO function. So this is one of the times that I tried to illustrate before, where it's very to have the SACEUR also be the US European Command Commander, because I was able to respond in a bilateral sense to the nations that we had bilateral arrangements with, as well as Article 5 arrangements with. To the military mobility, this is a big deal. And we have been working really hard on this. Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who was my Army component commander and now works in the George Marshall office in Germany, he's been working on this hard, and so has our current Secretary General, to get the nations back to a place where we can rapidly move across borders with forces, ammunition, etc. During this period of hugging the bear that we talked about before, all of those authorities started dwindling away. And what's even worse, because the authorities can be worked on relatively quickly, we stopped doing the things to build and inspect bridges and roads to understand which ones could be used with these heavy equipments and so forth. And so we have an engineering problem for mobility, and we have a policy problem for mobility, and we're working on that. And the policy piece is coming faster than the engineering piece, but we've got work to do there.
Good. Okay, I'm going to group a couple of questions together. You alluded to this a little bit, that Russian capabilities and actions also in the cyber and hybrid domains has increased quite a bit over recent years. So too have Russian activities in the high north. So how do you assess NATO's response to this so far? And this is the one I wanted to add in. I heard a recent interview that you did with an American organization, and I'm going to quote you here. You said, quote, "You cannot imagine a fight in Northern Europe that would not involve use of Swedish and Finnish air and sea space," unquote. So I'm going to ask, would you care to elaborate a little bit on your thinking on that subject?
Well, I think you have to look at that from the west and from the east. If our big friend to the east decides to invade NATO, northern NATO nations, it will cross and use both of your nations' airspace and sea space. It can't really have a fight in the northern Baltic Sea without bumping up against the sovereign spaces that Finland and Sweden have. And so this is just physics, dynamics, flight paths. It's impossible. And so I cannot see that we would, in the West, not see our obligation to come to the aid of our friends whose sea space, airspace, and maybe even land space would be used in such an endeavor. So this was not so much about intentions and all that stuff. It's about physics. If we're going to end up fighting in those spaces, if we're never going to start a fight in those spaces, but if we respond to an attack in those spaces, then we will have to, I think, look to the aid of our Swedish and Finnish brothers.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want me to speak to the other pieces of the question? So let me talk to the larger hybrid piece first, and then we'll touch just a little bit on the high north, which I've also talked about most recently. The bottom line is that we talk so much in the military spaces about our military responses to kinetic and military challenges. In the West, what we are not good at talking about is what I call all of government attack, which is just another way of talking about how countries like Iran, China, Russia use this hybrid warfare. They bring all of government attack on who they are approaching. I use a very simple term because I'm a fighter pilot. I like to use something I can remember. The American coin dime for 10 cents, D-I-M-E, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic power. So let's just examine Russia's attack on Ukraine. They attacked us broadly in D-I-M-N-E. Diplomatically, they tried to discredit the Poroshenko government. They tried to discredit the Revolution of Dignity, or Maidan, whatever you want to call it. They tried to bring all this pressure on the government to say that it was diplomatically inappropriate and not legitimate. Informational, or as I like to say about the Russians, disinformationally, broad attack in all the social medias. They used the ability to turn off information services between Crimea and Kyiv and other places. I mean, just a broad informational, disinformational attack on Ukraine. Militarily, as we've talked about, they rolled their military into both across internationally recognized borders and invaded and now occupy territory. And then economically, what did they use? They used changing of oil prices, recalling of oil loans, shutting oil and energy off, all these economic tools to try to bring Ukraine to heal. in this conflict. So in this hybrid attack that they put on, a broad all of government push on Ukraine. I'm going to just grade my nation's paper because I don't want to be seen as grading other nations' paper. Let's look at how the West, the United States, responded. Diplomatically, what did we do? Almost nothing. We said, Mr. Hollande, Ms. Merkel, you've got this in the Normandy format, and go with it. Informationally, the United States does not do disinformation and information war. I believe we need to start thinking about that, but we never have. Militarily, did we do anything really militarily for Ukraine? It took months and months and months just to get the most meager of military responses. At first, it was MREs and blankets and things that would have really small impact on military power. What did the United States do with Russia? It does what it always does with Russia. It says, we're not going to provoke Russia, but we're going to hammer them with economic sanctions. And so Russia attacks in a broad D, I, M, and E, and we respond with no D, no I, no M, and a large E. So we are out of balance in how we react to these hybrid attacks. Oh, by the way, I won't go through the whole spiel, but when we are attacked by radical Islam, we do no D, we do no I, we hit it with big M, and we do no E. And so we don't think in terms of the way our opponents think, which is broad governmental pressure using all tools of national power to attack. And I believe that is a problem for us. We need to think better about how we respond to all of this. I need to move on because we're using up so much time, but I want to say about the North, the high North. As a world, as a body of people, as a body of business, we should all be looking to the high North as an opportunity. Think about what it means to have I'm told as much as a 14-day shorter transit to go from Europe to Asia than normal going through the Suez Canal. And oh, by the way, what have we seen in the Suez Canal over the last week or so? And so we all, I think, could come, if we could find a peaceful way forward, we should see the high North as an opportunity. Certainly the Chinese see it as an opportunity. They're fighting like crazy. They've declared themselves a near Arctic nation, and they're trying to buy land so that they are going to be an Arctic nation to get on the Arctic Council. So people see this opportunity. And what we don't want to do is turn this into a military race, an arms race, a race to figure out who can control the high North. And sadly, we see some of that going on. And I think it's a big issue that all of us together should be addressing to try to find out how to avoid it.
Thank you. So I want to give our audience now plenty of time. I see that a number of questions are building up. You're probably going to be asked about the future U.S. posture in Europe, probably about Afghanistan. One more question that I would like to ask you, General. It's because FIA, as a Finnish think tank, has published several reports. And I've been involved in some of this. We've held a number of conferences as well dealing with nuclear weapons and arms control issues that aren't often treated in the Nordic space. Now, NATO periodically reiterates that it's a nuclear alliance, and we know that France, the United States, and the UK are modernizing their respective nuclear deterrents. But it's no secret that there are some political parties in Europe that are uncomfortable with the forward basing of relatively small numbers of US nuclear bombs on their territory, or they think that the price of maintaining dual capable aircraft is too high. As the Biden administration, as its predecessors have done, undertakes a review of global US posture, they'll almost certainly also do a review of US nuclear and missile defense policy. So I just want to ask your thoughts about the role of nuclear weapons in NATO's deterrence and defense strategy. And has your thinking changed since you left your SACEUR position?
So in essence, my position has not changed. I agree with some of the thoughts that Senator Nunn and the Nuclear Threat Initiative have, which is you can't fight and win a nuclear war. We need to avoid it. So the real question is, how do we avoid a nuclear war? And I think the way to do that is to have a credible nuclear capability, which would then deter. I do believe that NATO, as long as there are nukes in theater, meaning if Russia has nukes, NATO will remain nuke. And that was reaffirmed as late as June of last year, very clearly. And in our new Secretary of Defense's speech and in Secretary Blinken's speech recently, we have shown firm commitment to these NATO axioms, these things that we believe and hold about NATO. And so I do believe as long as we have an opponent that is that relies on its nuclear force, we will have to be nuclear. I said then, I still believe now, that DCA, dual capable aircraft, and the commitment to the DCA mission is an important thing for alliance cohesion. I believe and have said many times that really it's our cohesion, it's our solidarity that is the center of gravity of NATO. We need to continue to show commitment to these missions that bring us together. And one thing I would remind from my earlier discussion is that this credibility in this nuclear mission is all about the credibility of our capability to deliver if required. We need to look at our current force, our current delivery platforms, and determine, do we believe that they can penetrate a 5th generation IADS or A2AD as Russia is presenting all around the continent? And so we need to sit back and examine where we are. What are our platforms? What are the weapons? And do we present to the enemy that concern that the cost would be more than they could bear if they decide to go to this tactical nuclear or out nuclear war? And I believe that we have some work to do as we look at our force. And I would just close this thought with a famous quote. Some people believe it was Sun Tzu that said it, and some people have said it was Clausewitz that said it. Both of them sort of said it, but the words that we use these days are the enemy gets a vote. Okay, the enemy gets a vote. It's very clear that that Russia is setting the tone and pace in the nuclear debate. It abrogated the INF a decade or more ago. And then as it abrogated the INF, you saw the United States also fall out of the INF. Mr. Putin has had a very public stance about what he's doing in his nuclear forces and how he's upgrading it and how it's going to be undefeatable and we won't be able to stop it with our missile defenses, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's very clear what Mr. Putin thinks about the relevance and the importance of his nuclear forces, and in relation to the rest of his military, heavily investing in the modernization of his nuclear force. So if we believe what Sun Tzu or Clausewitz said, that the enemy gets a vote, it's very clear that Russia intends to keep this a nuclear theater. Ergo, I believe NATO has to have a credible response. And again, the credibility of our systems to penetrate and deliver is what creates deterrence in the mind of our opponent. And I think that's what we should be focused on.
Thank you. And just to clarify, because you probably meant to say that the Russian violation of the INF Treaty went back a decade or so. The actual leaving the treaty, which the U.S. and Russia did, was more recent. Let me turn this back to Charlie. Thank you so much, General, for these opening remarks. I'm going to go back to Charlie in Helsinki to moderate the Q's and A's for the rest of the discussion. Charlie.
Sure, great. Thank you very much, General Breedlove, and thank you, Leo. Leo, please also feel welcome to jump into any of the questions.
Sure.
You among the people sitting in Washington right now have probably the most extensive experience in terms of our region. I'll start with the first one we got. There was also regards from Sven Sakob, who's currently serving as the Estonian ambassador to Finland. So he's asking about your assessment of the future of arms control, and I'm guessing more broadly than just nukes, after the extension of START, and whether or not you see any potential pitfalls in NATO's ability to protect vulnerable frontline allies. So therefore, I'm assuming this is maybe arms control writ large.
So in my life, I like to call myself an optimist. And I believe that we have to move forward with arms control. First and most importantly, with nuclear arms control. I'm not happy. Leo, I think the word I used was abrogated, meaning whether they said they were in it or not, they had not applied themselves to that.
Oh, yes.
To that.
Right.
And so the fact of the matter is we need stability. And I believe these medium, short time of flight weapons, which the Russians have deployed in Europe that are nuclear capable, are destabilizing. We need to get after arms control in the sense of intermediate range forces again. We need to work hard to hang on to the arms control a la START that we have. And we need to, I think, bring stability to a part of the weapons problem in Europe, which I believe is unstable and becoming more unstable. So in the realm of nuclear arms control, I think it's very, very important. In the realm of conventional weapons, it's a bit more tricky. I don't think that we've had a good track record across history of creating this kind of arms control. We have had some agreements. I think we all understand that. We understand the history. But the relative effectiveness of those agreements have been somewhat questioned. And I don't denigrate the opportunity to find conventional arms control. I think it would be wonderful. The problem with conventional arms control is that at the point of impact, say Russian Federation land, NATO land, there may be a large discrepancy in the conventional arms mismatch in areas like that. And that's the problem that the West has to deal with. How do we, in these frameworks to stabilize, vice destabilize, how do we find those agreements that allow those at the point of contact to feel that they are benefited by the agreements that we're attempting to make? I do believe we should sit down and talk about it. But the idea that we would find a durable and what I would call verifiable set of agreements that would make everyone happy, that is a very tough order ahead of time. So to be clear, it's a really hard job. It's a really hard problem. And I may not be an optimist on the conventional piece, but that shouldn't keep us from thinking about it on both sides of the line.
Great, thank you. We're then going to go to some questions regarding both NATO, EU, and then civ-mil relations. And appropriately, the questions come from a Finnish parliamentarian and then a Finnish officer who has worked internationally and now I believe is at the hybrid COE. How do you see the division of roles between NATO and EU in preparing and responding to hybrid influencing and warfare? And then there's a follow-on to this kind of, which is when we're encountering these hybrid threats, gray zone challenges, the center of gravity may first be non-military, then it escalates or changes simply, it doesn't even need to escalate to the military, and then back again. So how do you think, from your experiences, we can ensure this civil-military coherence and kind of unity of action in escalation games, so whether or not it's information or others?
So let me first just be very complimentary of what your country is doing in this area. Your leadership and working on some of these issues as it relates to hybrid and so forth, and your center of excellence, and so these things. The work that you are doing, I think, is really important, and I'm thankful for it. But now let me be on this business of gray zone and hybrid. While I am a glass half full on almost every subject, this is the subject that I am very much a glass less than half full. As I mentioned before when we were talking about the specifics of Ukraine, we in the West are not good at responding in the softer parts of hybrid war. We know how to use the military, but we're reticent to use it because we have this refrain that we always say, we can't provoke ourselves there. And it typically is economic, we deal with Russia. And so in the genres of Western response, and that would include NATO and EU together, I am not high on the way that we handle this. I don't think that we use all of our government tools to combat these all of government attacks. I think that we are reticent in the West to do disinformation, and I completely agree. But what we haven't done is really gotten aggressive about telling the truths to answer some of the central falsehoods that are presented in these disinformation attacks that we face. So I believe that there are more relevant diplomatic, informational, and military responses, and that we should not limit ourselves only to economic responses when it comes to Russia. And you're right, the person who put together the question is absolutely correct. Our center of gravity right now is not about our military forces as much as it is about our democracies. This is something I talk about a lot about in America. In the last two elections, 2016 and 2020, I don't think that the Russians were trying to elect one or the other of anybody. But what I believe is what many others believe, and the book that I'm reading now is very clear on this, that it wasn't about a president. It was more about to try to discredit in total Western democracy, to tear Western democracy down to the level and style of a Russian democracy. And so we have to understand that the target may be the central pieces of what we are as democracies in the West. But then, much like it was in Ukraine, that sort of attack across a broad spectrum of things in diplomatic, informational, and economic means can also rapidly turn to military means. And the center of gravity then becomes the military effort. I hope I answered that question. In large terms, to your last part of the question about civil-military relations, I believe that it is a value of the West. And I get to talk about this a lot when I travel in nations sometimes that don't have this as a central tenet and have had juntas and other things that take over their governments. We value and I think practice in NATO civilian control of the military. While the Secretary General was the sort of civilian head of NATO, it was very clear to me as a SACEUR that I reported to the NAC, and that the NAC made the decisions that about my business as a military commander. And so I understood completely where it was I had to go to affect the things that I needed to affect for our military forces and our military missions.
Thank you. I'll follow up on this. It's actually a question, but it seems to fit in here. This is to do with strategic stability and hybrid threats. Fundamentally, it's how do you see the concept of deterrence, considering we've talked about nuclear, conventional systems, hybrid threats, cyber actions. How might we transatlantically think about this? And how might you, and this is my addition to the question, how might you advise smaller countries like Finland or Sweden or Norway or Estonia to think about their own deterrence as part of a larger package?
This is a tough subject. And in fact, I've been lecturing on it quite a bit lately about how do we deter in hybrid. And it's not as simple as counting tanks and rockets and airplanes and ships, et cetera, et cetera. Deterrence in hybrid is, in most people's view, a look to how do we increase cost on the attacker for their attack. And I must say here that I'm still a little bit less than, I think we're a little less than perfect in NATO on the way we approach this. Again, we've got some great work being done, and for the Estonian ambassador, he's very clear about what's going on in the Cyber Center of Excellence there in Tallinn. I've been there many times and taken groups there many times to see what NATO is doing. But in general, and what NATO is still writing about, as recently as 3 days ago, listening to what was said at a conference by a NATO leader, we are still focused on the defense in hybrid. The defense. How many great tennis players have you ever seen that agrees to go into a world level match and receive serve for the whole match? How do you play any sport, or how do you go into any competition and say that I am only going to fight defensively? This completely opens your opponent's workspace and opportunity for attack wide open. We have to, I think, in hybrid, in all the tools of hybrid, diplomatic, informational, economic, and even the hybrid military ways, we have to impose cost on the attacker. If I was Mr. Putin right now, watching what he can get away with in our capitals, and each capital is under attack, murders on the streets of large capitals, cyber attacks into the election systems in multiple nations, et cetera, et cetera. And if you see that you can do that and there is really no cost coming back at you, why would you change? Why would you stop? Let the West talk about it all they want, but if all they're going to do is defend, then I can attack. And so I think that what we need to look at in these scenarios of strategic instability and strategic stability and hybrid warfare, we need to go back to my opening statement and recognize that we are at war. We're not competing, we're at war, and we need to increase the cost on the attacker, because if we don't, he's gonna not change what he's doing.
Great. And I think we have a question here from Leo. Leo, you're welcome to jump in to here if you want to ask it directly.
General, you, in your role at SACEUR, you oversaw, obviously, the very important NATO and partner participation in Afghanistan. President Biden soon will be making important decisions on that. There's already been close consultation with Secretary of Defense Austin and Secretary of State Blinken with NATO allies. These are tough choices. None of them are good. So I just wanted to ask for your thoughts about the future of Afghanistan at this point, and what you think NATO and the U.S. role should be in the future.
So let me first, again, since we're speaking to an audience in Finland, let me thank you and your countrymen for all that you have done alongside NATO in more than Afghanistan, in the Balkans, in KFOR, in ISAF, and Resolute Support, in Bosnia-Herzegovina. We've seen your country be a part of NATO operations and do a great job at it. And now doing some of the things behind the scenes, like the Partnership for Interoperability Initiative. There's a lot of great things that I need to thank you and your lawmakers and your military for supporting NATO. And to that respect, then let me make a broader statement about partners in Afghanistan. And great, highly interoperable highly capable militaries like yours are always great partners to have, no matter what the mission and no matter where it is. I jokingly say sometimes that that your nation and the Swedes are more interoperable than some of our own NATO nations, because we're still working along the way there. But the exercising and the capabilities that your two countries bring to NATO as partners is really quite exquisite and much appreciated. And the exercising, and I would say very high-end exercising we do together on some of these very tough missions, and we'll not mention them all here, but some of these very tough, very technical missions together, that is a really big deal and very much appreciated by every SACEUR. And then I would just say also about a partner that is not Finland, but demonstrates another quality that partners bring to our business, is a partner like Georgia. You know, if we looked at Georgia and looked at it in a per capita basis, Georgia gave more soldiers to Afghanistan than any nation in Afghanistan, to include the United States, per capita. And if you look at the soldiers lost by Georgia, they lost more soldiers than any country in Afghanistan on a per capita basis, to include mine, the United States. So we have great high-end partners like your nation that come alongside us in these tough missions. And we have great smaller nations like Georgia who come alongside us in a very giving way. NATO is much better off because of its partners and its relationship to partners. To the question you asked larger about Afghanistan, I must tell you that my answer is a little bit personal, and I'll try to tell it quickly. The first time I landed in Afghanistan and tried to go from the military field where I landed to downtown to the headquarters, we drove. And it took us literally, I don't know, 15, 16 minutes. There was nobody on the road. We roared through the streets. All you saw on the road were men walking around. I compared that to a landing I did there as the SACEUR, where I was going to see President Ghani and have a meeting with him downtown. And normally now we don't drive, because there are so many people in the streets, and it would take so long to get from the airport to the headquarters that we took a helicopter. But on this particular day, we were forced to drive. And as we were driving, it took a long time. And as I looked all around the Capitol, I saw men and women walking on the streets. I saw children playing, and I saw young girls in school uniforms carrying mobile phones walking through the streets. So when you ask me about Afghanistan, that's the story I want to tell. I know the Afghanistan of when I first went there and what it was like for the people of Afghanistan. And I know the Afghanistan now, which is completely different, where young ladies and women have a place in society respected and protected, and all other manners of change. And so I must tell you that I think that what we have done in Afghanistan is worth it, at a great cost in both soldiers, sailors, airmen and Marines, and treasure. We have made change in Afghanistan. And so my counsel going forward is, let's not do anything that throws this to the wind. And I believe that the Biden administration is working its way through a lot of those questions. We don't want to do something precipitous that then risked losing everything that we have gained for these people, for these women, for these young girls in their schools and education. We don't want to back up another 200 years in Afghanistan because we do something precipitous. And so I do believe that we need to have a measured approach to what happens in Afghanistan, to try to give the country the very best chance of solidifying the changes that have been paid for by NATO, NATO's partners, and the Army of Afghanistan.
Thank you. Charlie, do you have more questions from the audience?
Well, I do have two. One particularly has to do with Finland and Sweden. I figured if I could ask that, and then I will ask you, Leo, to wrap up.
Sure.
All right. So the question has to do about Finland and Sweden. Fundamentally, I will combine. One question is, there's no treaty obligation, of course, between Finland and Sweden, and whether or not you see in your long experience, can common interest be enough for cooperation if treaty obligations are lacking? But I'll expand this a little bit to US and NATO and how you have seen or understood, you've touched upon this, our mutual interests kind of, I won't say merging, but going in the same direction since 2014. Do you see any risks also that kind of our interests will somehow diverge?
So we all understand there is no treaty. And I think everybody in both Finland and Sweden understand that if your people decided they wanted to be a part of NATO, that NATO would welcome you with open arms. And I think that what you also see is the militaries of NATO, every SAC year before me and every SAC year after me, have supported these very broad, very intricate and highly detailed and highly technical exercises and training opportunities that we take. We work very hard with both of these nations because they are very capable, highly interoperable, and we expect them to remain that way in the future. And as I said before, in my humble opinion, not the opinion of anybody else, just me, there's no way that a fight happens in the North that we're not all a part of. There's no way that we don't work together. It looks like we've had an outage here in the quarantine facility, but I think I'm still working. I apologize for the shade of the picture. The bottom line is we need to remain capable together because I can't see this happening in this part of the world without all of us being involved. Again, it's physics, it's landscape, it's airspace and sea space. Yes, we share common interests. The great governments of both Finland and Sweden very much align, are center in Western values as NATO sees them, and we all share these together. As I said before, the United States and other nations of the NATO alliance have many bilateral understandings with Finland and Sweden. And as I mentioned before, when we very first had a reaction to the invasion of the Donbass, it was the United States meeting a bilateral obligation with the three nations of the Baltics that first put force overhead their fields. And so I think that nations will do what they see are not only in the realm of the alliance, but in the realm of their bilateral relations.
General,
I was just going to say, I think for questions, that is a great way for me to end it. Say thank you, General Breedlove, and Leo, your turn to wrap it up.
Well, I'll just add my thanks to it. I would like to let our audience know that we have my co-host for this series, Ambassador Deborah McCarthy. We'll have a program in April. We hope to have retired ambassador and former Assistant Secretary of State, Dan Fried, who's a very expert on Europe, and to discuss issues such as US-EU cooperation and some of the issues that General Breedlove has touched upon as well. General, thank you so much. Once again, it's very great to have someone like you with your experience. And let me just be upfront about this, someone who has not only obviously in your role as SACEUR and as Commander European Command, but since then remained active in the national debate and the international debate, and has always done this in the nonpartisan perspective at a time of, as we all know, of accelerated or aggravated political polarization here in Washington. It's a delight to hear from you. Thanks to our listeners in Finland and elsewhere, and join us next month for another episode of Transatlantic Currents. Bye-bye.